Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
And just on that expectation piece, I guess it's for my own education as well. But again, this could probably differ by, the situation. But how easy in general is it to implement a CMMS tool? And what sort of we talked about culture quite a lot on this podcast. But and what sort of culture shift is required for a CMMS? So we know that's the case for predictive maintenance, for example.
I think you're talking to the right person because I have implemented a CMMS when it was really only me. So I was the only person responsible for anything. But again, I felt I bared a lot of burden for that too, because I was like, oh, this is on my shoulders. If this fails, this is me. This is only me, right? I'm the only one. I went to bat for this. I did everything. Implementing is not hard. Again, depending on the solution, depending on your needs, you really have to break it out. It's a long-term play, right? I've said it a few times. Maintenance management is a long-term play. It's not a short-term game. I even remember going through the conversation and I told my leadership, they're like, when can we expect to see a return on investment or start seeing like quality data that we can act on? I had no experience. I had done some research on, on Google. And ChatGPT wasn't around at the time, right? So I couldn't ask ChatGPT. That's a different conversation. But I was trying to figure out what the ROI and when I could expect to see, the data. And for my time in the Navy, I became very data-driven. I started to find the reports that I thought were meaningful to me and help tell a story and help articulate my point of view of why I needed things, or why I needed more money, or why I needed more resources. So for me, I wanted to undersell, or I wanted to underpromise and overdeliver. So I was like, oh, it'll be like 18 months until we start seeing, good quality data to inform our decisions, right? When in reality, depending on what data I needed, I could have mapped that day one, and that could have been the priority focus on implementation. I'll talk for timeline here. My orientation call was on Monday. All of my assets were built in my system by midweek. I didn't have many. I had like 125. I put it in an Excel spreadsheet and I gave it to my implementation team. They imported it to the solution for me. And then by Friday, I was already documenting reactive tickets against assets. But again, I wasn't in a preventive maintenance state, so I wasn't building preventive maintenance schedules yet. Over time, I organically started building my inventory management because every purchase order I went and got signed had line items on it. I would take those line items, I would sit down at my desk at the end of the day, and I would build part profiles with supplier information, lead time, the quantity that I wanted to be my safety stock level, which I had no idea how to stock or how to build and understand what a true safety stock level was. I was flying by the seat of my pants. But I can honestly say a week into having access to my CMMS, I was utilizing it and I was documenting work orders from the plant floor. Now, months until I was able to generate a good report that started to say, because one of my big things, they didn't understand what I was doing. They're like, oh, we know you're busy. We know you're running around. You're taking care of a lot of things. I couldn't quantify anything. And by not being able to quantify things, I was just another person with an opinion. And maintenance people get it a lot. We cry wolf. We cry for these replacement of assets. We cry for resources. We cry for all this stuff. And crying probably isn't the right term, but we're very vocal about it. So without data, they're just kind of like, we've heard it before, right? But now if I can start to quantify and show some data, now some phase 2 can get kicked off, which is starting to either retrain operators on best practices by building data, right? Like how many failures were due to lack of procedures followed by the operators, right? Operators, they're not wrong. They're only a byproduct of what they've been taught. And again, the culture of the company. So I'm not blaming operators when I say it's an operator error-based issue. Is it lack of documentation? Is it lack of training, right? It's an organizational thing. It's a culture thing. Just like if you try to move a maintenance organization or a company culture from reactive to proactive, that takes everyone. Talked about what it takes to sell. The business case is the C-suite. but you also need to get warehouse on board. You need to get your production floor on board. You need to get the production schedulers. Like it becomes a culture, because you only start identifying these problems if you don't have sensors, through word of mouth, through a request portal. And if they're not on board with it and they don't understand what's in it for them, how it's going to make their life easier, how it's going to help them hit their production numbers, or justify that the downtime was based on maintenance related issue, not them just running idle, then they'll start to slowly gain traction and come on board with it. So implementation, CMMS, I've seen it as easy as 1 week. You're up and running, right? But it depends on your need. How much data are you bringing over with you? What are your priorities? What are the pain points of why you're switching or implementing a new CMMS? So it's probably similar. It's a more mature conversation when we start talking PDM, right? Because at this point, your customers hopefully have the data to understand where their top 5 contributing assets to downtime are. They've probably already quantified the cost per unit of downtime or cost per machine per hour of downtime. So the business case is already built. Now you just have to show how easy your solution is to fit into that piece. And again, is it something that just it fits the business need, or does the business have to change what they're doing to fit the solution? And that's something that none of us ever want to do. We don't want to change the business process to mirror the solution. We want our solutions to plug and play into the culture that they're cultivating.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's, when I mentioned the ecosystem, I guess that's what I'm referring to, that it should form part of existing workflows. And to that point, the other challenge, I guess, it sounds like CMMS is on occasion can be implemented quickly, but I guess it's the other piece, the culture, but also the adoption of the technology. So there's one thing implementing technology, but it's actually getting people to believe in what's there and using the information that's there, in their day-to-day life or day-to-day working life.
I think it's sometimes, again, that's a long-term plan. I've talked to people in very large organizations. It's taken 5 to 6 years to fully say they've launched their CMMS, right? But that's because you're talking about a few hundred touch points, end users trying to adopt a new software that maybe, again, this enterprise had 5 distinct decentralized business units who were all doing their own thing in different forms and fashions, right? Some were probably very immature in their maintenance practices. Some were probably very mature. And then now you're trying to create a baseline. So again, you're going against the grain in a lot of places for a lot of people. It's a lot of moving parts. But again, I think it's all about the messaging and the culture. So the messaging down to the end users, what's in it for you and what's the benefit. And sometimes that takes data.
Exactly. No, definitely. I just wanted to move on. Actually, sadly, we're coming, I guess, towards the end in some ways, but it's just absolutely flown by, I have to say.
No. Probably a few pieces being cut out here and there, but
no, well, maybe here and there, but no one needs to know about that. We're perfect. We never make mistakes, so it's fine. Yeah. But I wanted just to touch on, because we've talked a lot about maintenance practices, and I guess that buzzword, as we've already mentioned, it's sustainability, which is also another very important part of the equation. So I guess my question would be, how can maintenance professionals work more sustainably, and how do the tools that we've discussed sort of help with that?
I hate to say it, but again, it comes back to defining what sustainability is and why it's important for them, and the messaging to them to understand why it's important and what they can do to help. Right? If we're talking about ESG in the broad sense, and you're just talking about the environmental piece, right? The operators or the technicians have a very hard time correlating their actions on a day-to-day basis with the overall emissions footprint of the facility. Right? I was in a facility, it was 2 buildings on one plot of land, one campus, and we're pretty climate controlled. I wouldn't say we had a great system, but we didn't have to. We weren't very process driven. We weren't like food and beverage. We weren't pharmaceutical industry that had to be temperature regulated. But at the same time, in the summertime here in North Carolina, it gets pretty warm. It gets pretty muggy and humid as well. We have the AC down pretty low to try and pump. And then either the warehouse team running things back and forth between different buildings, opening bay doors. I mean, now I can look back and see how much of the energy is just flowing out the door, right? Through trying to climate control a building and then leave a bay door open for 30 minutes to an hour, right? Or if it got too hot in there, even with the AC, we open the doors, but we don't think to turn off the AC. So that's a lot of waste. So that's how you start thinking of framing, and it takes a little bit of education to the operators and to your front line of how are their impacts, on a micro scale, multiplying up to a macro impact. So if we're talking about GHG, I think more manufacturers can start taking ownership of their utility spend through energy management tools to track and trend, understand where they're wasteful, and make opportunities for improvement. Because the Department of Energy study for the US states that of commercial and industrial facilities, it's estimated that 30% of your utility consumption is wasted, whether it's through the example of bay doors are open, or inefficient roofs or insulation, whatever it may be, or inefficient equipment. So imagine 30% of your utility bill that you get to keep in your pocket every month. So how many manufacturing facilities out there are just paying their utility bills and they don't care, or they're not checking, right? So they don't understand about a third of that is to waste. But now getting to sustainability, my definition of sustainability, which I've taken this from others, is reducing waste. It's as simple as it has to be, reducing waste. If you reduce waste, it's a more sustainable process. So as a maintenance technician, I think going through the 8 steps of typical waste through like transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, inappropriate processing, and defects, again, understanding which of those I can help contribute and control, and then eliminate those. And the simplest way I can think of it for maintenance is if we're using paper-based preventive maintenance program, and then we go to a Siemens. How much paper did we just cut out, right? And that paper only has one purpose. If I'm not a regulated industry, I don't have to keep 3 years or 7 years of historical work order data. It can get left on the desk for a month and then it goes in a burner, right? And all it was used was to convey information and retrieve information that probably nothing happens with to begin with. So if we reduce that, also think of a manufacturing facility, consider them larger, and then the amount of time technicians take responding to an issue. They probably go from where they are, they get a walkie-talkie, they go to an office, they sit down, log onto a computer, they print out a work order, get assigned a work order. Then they go to the equipment to start doing their diagnosis, start seeing what's wrong, and then they go get the tools they need, and then they spend 30 minutes to an hour going to find the parts they need, right? And then they come back over and then they fix it. And then they have to go put everything back away, and they go report the fix, and then rinse and repeat, right? That's a lot of wasted motion. That's a lot of wasted time as well. That's why technicians can be very inefficient in certain processes. That's an organization that doesn't have a maintenance planner. And maintenance planners aren't a critical role for, again, anyone that's probably not an enterprise. If you're an SMB manufacturer, you can probably get away without a maintenance planner, but your maintenance manager, maintenance supervisor, or lead technician, I think a best practice most people could do for sustainability purposes is start documenting more work and then dispatching through electronic means via an app for your CMMS. So having something updated, and then have documentation that's available electronically, and then also having your inventory readily available and understanding where it is and what it is. So if we start reducing all that wasted motion and time or transportation between, that's a sustainable function for the business as a whole, because you're getting more efficient use out of your technicians and your human capital, but then also performing preventative maintenance. Like Max Baer said, that's a sustainability function. Think of it like a car. If you don't maintain your car, it becomes inefficient. Inefficient vehicles consume more fuel. They break down more often. They pollute more. If you maintain your car and it's very efficient and it's kept up with, it's going to last you a long time. So again, you also have to think of the procurement of that asset or that vehicle. It used a lot of resources to make that vehicle. And it was built with the intention, if you maintain it at a base level, it'll last 20 years. we've already seen with some Honda Civics and Toyota Corollas, they'll last for 30, 40 years, right? That's a reliable and a sustainable vehicle if you take care of it. And my brother growing up, he had a Honda Civic. He didn't take care of it any, right? So when he bought it, it was like 20 years old. But 5-6 years later, that thing's junk, right? And some people buy brand new cars and do that to it. Manufacturers do it to brand new equipment and do it. That's not a sustainable business model. That's not a sustainable process. Not only from a financial aspect, but the efficiency. So think of a industrial equipment, a heavy industrial piece of equipment that's not upkept with, becomes very inefficient. It's now producing more waste through defect products that don't pass quality standards. It now runs inefficiently and isn't available for production runs when needed. And it also probably pollutes more, uses more energy consumption because it's compensating for failures or things that aren't operating as intended. And then the long run too, the waste, the consumption, it can also become more dangerous and it can pollute in your environment. Brake dust, right? If you have brake pads on electric or on motors and they start tearing through the brake pads and no one's fixing it, no one's correcting it, right? Or it's tension too much, it's going to throw brake dust in the air. I'm sure that's not great for operators and your employees to breathe in. So that's a long-term, non-sustainable method and safety hazard. But also what happens if it hits catastrophic failure? And we've seen it with CNCs or hydraulic presses. And they start mystified hydraulic fluid and then catches a spark, right? And that's all because that piece of equipment probably wasn't properly maintained or safety protocols weren't followed. I guarantee you that piece of equipment wasn't very well maintained in a sustainable process and sustainable manner. Therefore, it became inefficient. And now, unfortunately, you see more and more of these catastrophic events that happen. So I think at the core, sustainability is just reducing waste. And there's a lot of waste around us that we don't realize or correlate to in certain instances. So I think just defining it and educating our frontline operators on what it means to them and how they can help.
And I mean, you actually covered quite a lot of metrics there, which is really interesting. Would you say they're actually easy to quantify? Because obviously there's a lot of metrics that aren't easy, but it sounds like there's a lot in there which you can attribute, and put back in the sustainability box, let's say.
I think it's just a mindset thing more than the actual data saying like, hey, this is not a sustainable thing. I don't think there are a lot of sustainability metrics. It's more intangibles. Like we just need to understand obviously what sustainability means and are our actions supporting that? Are our actions that we're doing, are they sustainable?
And again, that leads back to the culture. It's like the theme running through our conversations today is how important culture is.
I said I've seen a lot of it recently, and then going through a few different educational things I've been doing. Culture just keeps coming up over and over, and it's just a pillar. Like I was watching Ted Lasso last night, right? And then I had this epiphany. Trent Grimm walks in, and they're talking about Total Football. It was the latest episode where Ted had like this epiphany. His system wasn't working. He's not a tactician anyways. And then Total Football, like the triangle offense for basketball now translate to Johan Cruyff's Total Football for the Dutch team and for Ajax and Barcelona back in the day. And Trent Grimm runs in and he goes, oh my gosh, you've been doing these slow incremental cultural changes over time that have now blossomed into this thing, blah, blah, blah. And again, it was funny watching a show that was all embedded about cultural change as well over a 3-year span, and then having this conversation about culture. And then the past 2 months, all I've read up on and seen cool statistics about is culture and how to change culture. So yeah, I think it's core to everything we do. And I think it's core to best maintenance practices. Like without a good culture, a bad culture will beat a good system any day of the week, right? If we implement Senseye at my manufacturing facility tomorrow, no matter what you tell me the ROI is, if my culture isn't built to support it or to adopt it, it's going to fail. So I think the culture is the horse before the cart here.
Exactly. And the cart being the technology, which is often the misconception is the technology is what needs to be. As long as you have the technology, the culture will follow. But as we found, that's certainly not the case.
Now they can run in tandem. They can change and evolve with each other over time. but it is highly recommended to try and get your culture right before you try to implement all these new Industry 4.0 digital transformation strategies.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we're coming towards the end, but I just thought it'd be good for you to summarise just some of what we've talked about today, and I think culture might be mentioned here as well. But in terms of, I'm just thinking from a manufacturing perspective, they want to get started on digital transformation and being more efficient with their maintenance. So what are the sort of 3 key takeaways from your point of view to sort of get started on that journey?
That they want to become more efficient with their maintenance?
Yeah, exactly. So it could be using certain tools or whatever, but it's also, you know, that word culture again could be mentioned too, I guess.
It depends. What is your culture now? What is your current state of performing maintenance at what service levels? That's all going to depend on, what end of the spectrum your efficiency gains you can expect, right? If it's like big jumps because you're going from nothing to something, or if it's little incremental improvements. I think the right tool for the right people. Make sure if you do have a tool in place, people are actually using it, people enjoy using it, and it fits their needs. Stop trying to fit square pegs in a round hole, right? For me, there's no way I was using an ERP maintenance module. Again, it may have just been the one I had tested out, I had tried. It just wasn't for me. I didn't like it. I had already seen a CMMS prior to, so I already was biased coming in, right? I was like, oh no, this thing is so much better, right? So much more efficiencies. I think the next is, if you're still in that reactive culture, mapping out the process of how you're going to become more proactive. And that's a cultural thing, right? A CMMS isn't going to fix that. A CMMS will support that. But you really need to understand, again, just like run to failure. Run to failure is a valid maintenance strategy. And you can track your run to failure in a CMMS, by the way. Work order history, trend detection, right? Using that data to start justifying when we replace things. Because if we run it to failure, maybe it's not going to last the 10 years that they told us was going to if we did this. So the right tool for the right people. The next is understanding the appropriate service levels that you need to meet production, right? Everything in a manufacturing facility is support for production. Everything revolves around production, right? The company doesn't make money if we're not producing a trinket, no matter how good our supply chain is, no matter how good our maintenance function is, no matter how squared away our financials are, right? If production isn't running, you're not doing anything. So understand what service levels and what PM to reactive ratio or corrective ratio you can balance to meet your production needs. And that's an economical balance too, right? Because it costs money to perform maintenance and it costs money to not perform maintenance. So you have to strike the balance. I think that will help in the efficiency of knowing you're performing the right maintenance at the right times, unlike the Navy, right? Where we're just always doing it just because we have to do it, not because of rhyme or reason. It's just what we've always done. And I think the third is for efficiency, and this kind of follows the maturity scale as well, is start utilizing the data. Start looking at the data, start to either through Pareto analysis or reliability data points like mean time to repair, mean time between failure. Start understanding where your bad actors in your operation are. Start to understand and correlate problem cause codes through root cause analysis or 5 whys, whatever methodology you use. And then understand, go through that OODA loop again of observe, orient, decide, act, and understand it's all about vision, right? Even culture, it's all about vision. Someone has to have a vision of where you want to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You have to understand what that vision is. You have to go in and say, okay, here's where we are now. Here's where we want to be. And then here's how we're going to get there. So I think in first phase of maintenance efficiencies, people just want a better system to track what they're doing. Whether you stay reactive or you're pretty proactive now, you just need the right tool that people are going to use. That's foundational, right? You could be 199% proactive maintenance, but you don't have any data because you lack the right tool for the right people to make it easy for them to capture. Or if you have the right tool, you're not getting any data because you're not doing you're not getting any data you can decide and make insights off of because you lack the appropriate service levels and the work orders to tell you if you're doing a good job or not, if you're meeting your production needs. But again, if you have the right tool and you're doing all the right service levels, do you have data? Can you make any decisions off of that data? So I think the data piece is the part that everyone needs to start going to, and I think a lot of people are. And that's where the Industry 4.0 comes in, that fully connected manufacturing stack of sharing information, right? A CMMS, what the goal of a CMMS is to do is, if you're doing it in a proactive state, is to maximize the availability of your equipment. That's a data point. That's a data point that a lot of manufacturers track for their OEE calculation, right? A CMMS traditionally is not going to do your quality or your throughput ratio for your OEE calculation, right? So it's just going to do the availability piece. So it needs to be integrated and push that data into other integrated technologies in your environment that share that data with each other. Think of the inventory. CMMSs have inventory modules. But again, a lot of people keep that data in their ERP. So now you have this gap between your maintenance technicians are the one consuming the materials for repairs, but we track the master data in ERP, and the two aren't connected. That becomes an issue, right? And then you lack the data to make appropriate purchase order decisions. When do we stock parts? At what point do we stock them, right? Et cetera. So I think, to summarize, we talked a lot about culture. I think it all starts with a vision. You have to get your culture right before you can make any real change or support long-term any good, meaningful change. I think you need to put the right people in place with the right tools. And then you need to understand what's the balance. Not every manufacturing facility is world-class 80-20 PM to reactive ratio, right? Some can be 50-50, and that makes sense for them. But you can only make that decision if you have the data. So I think CMMSs can do all of that. You can add on top the PDM piece, or you can skip some of that in between and go right to a PDM, right? It's not unlinear. You don't have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? We talk about crawl, walk, run. That's really the methodology and the mindset you have to have going into implementing a new software, not necessarily how you adopt new softwares and how you scale and grow.
Yeah. No, exactly. Some really good takeaways there as well. So yeah, I mean, we've come to the end, but it's been an absolute pleasure, Corey, to pick your brains, especially with your background and experience. It's been a learning curve for me as well. Actually, I've learned a lot of new things. So it's been a real pleasure, and thank you again for taking part.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I hope all my little short rambles there were useful for some people. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I guess just finally, how can people find out about Brightly? I guess what's the best way to find out more about Brightly and what you guys are doing?
BrightlySoftware.com. It's the easiest way. Like I said, we're a Siemens company. We're also on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. Playing around with being active or not, putting out content, see what happens, see what people like or what they don't. So you can find us brightlysoftware.com.
Yeah, I should probably say for my own research purposes, I did look at some of Corey's posts and a bit of background as well. Some really interesting stuff there. So I definitely recommend connecting with him. I'll put the links in the show notes as well, so everyone can.
If you like memes, I try to keep it light. I don't take myself too seriously. So post some memes, have some fun, use my experiences in manufacturing, some conversations I've had. Obviously, blur out names and stuff or mask them, and then make them into memes and share them, because I think that's how my generation communicates, right? That's how most of us courted our partners we're with, is through gifts or through memes, right? You can make someone laugh, you make a friend.
Exactly. And we're talking about human connection here. So if you can make that human connection for a meme, I see nothing wrong with that either. And that's a marketing person speaking as well. So,
please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.